Hello, today is Wednesday, September 13th, and welcome to episode 249 of Fault Lines as we come to the end of our Summer of AI series, Breaking Barriers, Understanding the AI Revolution. I'm thrilled to be here today with Jennifer Hay, the Director of the Defense Digital Service within the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office of the Department of Defense, a visiting fellow at George Mason University's National Security Institute. She previously served as the head of Global Government Relations for DataRobot, Deputy Director for Intel and Security Programs at the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and as a senior advisor to the Deputy Director for Defense Policy and Strategy at the White House's National Security Council. So we're thrilled to be here with you today, Jennifer, and just want to sort of, take you back a little bit. You've had an extensive career working in a number of high-level positions at the DOD, at the National Security Council, at the White House. You've worked in the private sector at DataRobot. Talk to us about your current job, right? Tell us about DDS. You've just newly taken on, congratulations, the role as director heading up DDS. Tell us about DDS. Tell us a little about where it came from and the role it plays within the CDAO, the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office of the Department of Defense.
Great, Jamil. Thank you. I'm super happy to be here. And just a little bit about DDS. We are a team of software developers. We have engineers, product managers, as well as user design researchers. And our goal is to bring digital solutions to the Department of Defense. Essentially, anybody in DoD that has a problem that they think software can solve, they call DDS, and we're essentially a SWAT team that will come in, identify their problem and provide them with a digital solution. So some of the things that we've done in the past, in Afghanistan, we worked on a text messaging system for the U.S. military and the State Department to be able to communicate with people who were eligible for evacuation very quickly. Clearly, that was a situation that went south fast, and DDS was called to very quickly come in and figure out a way for the U.S. government to communicate with people in Afghanistan. Also in Afghanistan, we built a employment verification database for Afghan special immigrant visas to help speed up that process to ensure that people that did work for the Department of Defense while in Afghanistan can get their employment validated much faster to speed up the process for their Afghan special immigrant visa. We were established in 2015 to really be a landing point for people in the private sector to come work for the U.S. government, to work for the Department of Defense. We were an offshoot of the success of the U.S. Digital Service. And then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter wanted to create an office where he could leverage best practices from the private sector, from the tech sector. And so we stood up DDS, and we come and serve on short-term tours between 2 and 4 years to bring in our best practices and deliver those solutions to DoD.
Awesome. Well, what an amazing capability, right? This idea that we're actually going to take people from the private sector, bring them into the Department of Defense, create workable solutions for the warfighter, for the intel services and the like. I mean, this is really exactly the kind of thing that we've been talking about for years, the kind of things that DoD needs to do. So it's really awesome that you're heading up this shop. So, part of the purpose of our summer podcast series is to talk about artificial intelligence. And I know you've worked in the private sector on these issues as well. Talk to us about the role, if any, that DDS and CDAO writ large play in setting the policy and doing some of the work for DoD in the AI domain, if at all.
So CDAO's mission is to accelerate DoD's adoption of data analytics and AI solutions across the Department of Defense. So CDAO is a new office that was stood up last year, and it consolidated 5 offices that were focused on digital solutions, which was predominantly DDS, as well as artificial intelligence. It consolidated the chief data officer, the Project Maven, which was the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security's program to use AI to analyze full motion video. It also consolidated the Joint AI Center, which that was the big one that CDAO took over. The Jake, yes.
Yep.
And finally, CDAO also took over the Advana platform from the comptroller, which is, Advana is a data service that the Department of Defense can have access to quality data sets as well as commercial off the shelf products to help them analyze their data.
Cool.
So CDAO is really at that forefront of developing those policies as well as building the capabilities, the general capabilities that the department can leverage in order to adopt AI faster.
Got it.
The role DDS plays in this, we're kind of an anomaly
Mm,
within CDAO because we do focus on the D in CDAO, the digital side of things,
right.
where we're building software solutions. However, the Department of Defense has definitely started to come around to the idea of quality data integration in order
Yeah.
to ensure that they're AI ready when they are ready to implement an AI solution. And so DDS has taken on a handful of different projects related to data integration. We like it
Mm,
because we're focusing on a very specific use case and we're learning those lessons that the rest of CDAO can adopt to
cool.
figure out how best to scale data integration across the Department of Defense.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about AI policy because obviously that is the hot topic of the day. But I do want to spend a little bit of time on DDS and your work in the data space because it's important, as you know. So one of the big debates or one of the big issues we've heard about AI and the like is, how solid is the data coming in? How safe is it? How protected is it? How can we ensure privacy when artificial intelligence is being used on large data sets? How's DDS thinking about both sort of the cleanliness of the data coming in, right, and the privacy and security of the data as you're thinking about it, as the rest of CDAO and the rest of the department is thinking about how to apply artificial intelligence to larger and larger data sets to accomplish its mission.
So big CDAO is definitely spending a lot of time on those types of problems to ensure that cleanliness of the data, as well as to apply responsible AI frameworks to the data that's being used, as well as any predictions that would come out of an AI. A model being applied to this data. Uh, DoD led the way in building a responsible AI framework, which is really exciting. In terms of DDS, we on our data integration problems, we have a team of data scientists that will we deploy them to the problem. They get deployed onto that problem, and they help the customer organization, better understand the data, better shape their question to ensure that the data that they are using to inform their ultimate questions is actually the data they need,
Right.
and help them identify spots where it may be less than accurate, so they can build processes to collect the correct data.
Yeah.
Another cool thing that DDS is just in the very beginning stages of working on with our responsible AI partners is a bias bounty. So DDS
Hmm.
led the very first bug bounty inside the Department of
Right.
Defense. We did that back in 2016, and we continue to regularly host bug bounties where we ask the general public to find
Yeah.
vulnerabilities in our networks. The Responsible AI Office has partnered with us to use that type of methodology to identify potential bias in data sets. So we're initially
Interesting.
targeting an open source model that the DoD leverages to see how this can work, and that is something that we're hoping we can scale across the department as
Yeah.
AI becomes more prevalent.
Very cool. Now, as we talk about, biases, this is again another topic that's come up a lot in the debates over
Mhm.
AI. And you mentioned biases in the data sets. Is the work that you're doing, is it also biases in the models themselves, the model weights and the like, or is it primarily about ensuring the data sets are free from bias and as a result, ideally the outcomes?
Unfortunately, many of the projects that we're working on, they are not anywhere close to building any sort of model and gaining
Yeah.
predictions. So my team and even the larger CDAO team is very focused on the data, getting
Yeah.
comfortable with data frameworks. So eventually we can get to the point where we can quickly deploy models. There are a couple examples of where models have been deployed, but DoD still is in the phases of a nascent stage of both understanding the technology and identifying appropriate use cases in which to use AI.
Yeah. Well, this is a great point. So, and I think a great opportunity for us to shift to the policy debate, right? So, one of the things that I was interested in, because you've worked across such a range of areas, and having previously worked in USDI, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence's office, on a lot of policy and strategy issues, then going to the National Security Council, then the private sector, all in places where AI is potentially going to be used or was actually being used when you're a data robot and deployed. Talk to us about how you've seen the development of policy over the years. And I mean, was DOD, when you were there in your prior position, was DOD thinking about AI, and was the National Security Council thinking about it, and how has that changed over time?
So back in 2015, I was actually working for then Deputy Secretary of Defense Bob Work, and then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, and they started to coalesce around the idea that the Department of Defense needs to modernize and innovate.
Imagine
And
that.
yes, and acknowledging that innovation occurred in small and medium sized companies, and they really did a deep dive into what's the next emerging technology that
Yeah.
will be a game changer in warfighting. And that became known as the third offset strategy. How does DoD maintain its competitive advantage in comparison to our adversaries? And that is really when I first saw AI starting to emerge and take hold. Project Maven came out of the third offset strategy, the creation of the Defense Innovation Unit. How do we tap into the private sector? DDS also came out of that third
Right.
offset strategy, as well as Ash Carter's Force of the Future initiative, the JAKE, emerged, where there was this idea that AI could actually, there is value in warfighting in AI, but we don't know anything about this technology. There's a bunch of these
Yeah.
random little startups that are using AI. We've heard about, we watch Netflix, and so they use AI, but how could that apply to warfighting?
Right.
And so there was a lot of talk, and then Project Maven really showed that AI could be used in a warfighting context, and
Got a lot of people spun up.
really got a lot of people, both in the public and private sector, got
Yeah.
a lot of people spun up. And I will say that type of energy around AI has maintained since 2015. It's, there's a lot of new cool shiny objects that enter the Pentagon that fizzle out with the change of administration. But as AI is taking hold in the private sector and it's starting to permeate people's personal lives, they're recognizing that there is a role for this in
Yeah.
warfighting. And so the policy community, though, is slow. It has always been to are slow followers when it
Yeah.
comes to how do we regulate and influence new technology. And I think Europe is light years ahead of light years ahead of the U.S. government when it comes to thinking about where do we need to regulate and how we need to regulate to ensure confidence in artificial intelligence. But I do think that even though the department is very focused on how do we implement AI to ensure that competitive advantage, and that policy is slowly starting to catch up with how we responsibly use AI to ensure that competitive advantage.
A lot of people have talked about how far ahead the EU is. They've got the AI Act and the like. There are those who believe, I don't include myself in that group, right, where, maybe being ahead in regulation is not the right place to be, right? We want responsible regulation, right? But, there's a lot to be said also for the need to ensure innovation, right, here in the United States. And so stepping carefully, as you know, is an important part of that. And I want to talk about sort of something that I know CDAO has been working on and the like. You guys have recently established Task Force Lima, and talk to us about what that organization is going to do, what its goal is, and whether you think, sort of policy is starting to catch up. Really, you mentioned it's getting there, but are we there? When are we going to get there? And I'm more interested, put aside regulation for a second. The White House has got that. They're doing their thing, and they've got the principles, and working with the Senate. What's DOD thinking on in terms of AI policy? And what's Lima's role, if any, in that whole process?
So Lima was stood up to really address the LLM, the large language model issue. It took DOD
Yeah.
by surprise storm, like much
All of
like
us.
the rest of the world. Yes,
Yeah.
that Chat GPT was just this Pandora's box that has been opened up, and DOD, to Dr. Martell's credit, immediately pivoted and said we need to focus on how large language models can be used inside the Department of Defense. And so he stood up Task Force Lima to look at that specific issue, that what is the role of LLMs in Task Force Lima. Now he is, and the task force is tasked to identify use cases in which LLMs can be used. That's one of their first missions. Is sure, we can all log into Chat GPT and give it a prompt and see what comes out, but how would we use that in a genuine Department of Defense situation? Would we use it to write policy? Would we use things like LLMs or to help us write code when we're building software? Would we use it to create our own information operations campaigns in other countries? There's all sorts of use cases that LLMs may be applied to. Task Force Lima is their first task is to work with the private sector and academia to identify what those appropriate use cases are, and then taking those use cases and looking at like responsible deployment of and that's how the department wants to, under Dr. Martell's leadership, want to regulate the use of AI. Is what are deployment criteria that you have a model, and this is scalable across any sort of machine learning or artificial intelligence model, that we have deployment criteria in which a model can effectively and responsibly be deployed out into the wild. And so Task Force Lima, specifically looking at LLMs, will help inform that for the rest of CDAO as they build some of those frameworks.
Cool. And I know we're limited on time, so I've only got a couple more questions, and but I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of the threats that you all see as you start thinking about the deployment of not just LLMs, but all the capabilities that these large language models and other AI enabled capabilities bring to bear, both within the department, but with our adversaries as well. How concerned should we be about adversary capabilities, adversary development and innovation in this space? And are we going to be able to keep up, or is this something that's going to empower our adversaries more than it's going to empower ourselves and the department?
I don't think it's going to empower our adversaries any more than it will empower us. I do think that the fact that we are looking at responsible AI and have invested so much into understanding the capability, and then the private sector has invested, and the government has invested hundreds of millions of dollars into developing artificial intelligence and understanding the capability. And so with that, I do think that we are, I think we only have one competitor in this space, and that would be China. So I really do think that it brings us a decision advantage that, of course, our adversaries will be able to leverage as well as they learn and start to deploy AI. And it's you can purchase AI as well. There are so many companies out there that are working on building models that can be purchased. And so it will become accessible to so many more countries as it continues to permeate. So I do think that it will be will level the playing field essentially. But I do think it's something that we should continue to invest in, because it will just improve our decision advantage in conflict when there's so many different types of data coming at you, that a computer can help sift through all of that information to allow a human to make a decision faster. Our adversaries will have that same capability. So if they're using artificial intelligence, they're using it creatively, they can get that decision advantage. There is also, going back to the data and clean data, there are huge risks, especially when it comes to large language models, to the data that is being used to make those predictions, and they could inject false data that would create predictions that are not trustworthy. And then something to keep in mind is that any artificial intelligence isn't designed to get to the truthful answer. It's designed to get to the most likely answer. And um, that's why it's so important to ensure that quality data is coming in, and our adversaries know that if they inject bad data, bad predictions will come out.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Last question for you, since you've had a foot in the private sector and the public sector, and you're now back serving the country, which we really appreciate. Talk to us about the importance of both the public sector adopting and utilizing this capability, but the private sector innovating and continuing to roll forward. How critical is that, both to the mission of the Department of Defense, but also to our national security?
So I definitely believe that innovation is occurring in the private sector, and especially in these small and medium-sized companies. There's a lot of fantastic ideas that are being developed in the private sector that do have that dual use capability inside DoD. And I really think that DoD's key to success is becoming a fast follower in this private sector technology. That building technology from the ground up inside, and DoD being that leader in innovation, is just we're too big, we're too slow. But being able to adopt commercial technology is really something where we need to leverage that, which means that the Department of Defense really needs to do a hard look at how to become a better customer, working with Congress to help change some of these rules when it comes to software acquisition. That software acquisition is much different than hardware acquisition, and we shouldn't be applying the same rules. And so I do think that their DoD really needs to take a moment and figure out how to become a better customer, so they can onboard very quickly that commercial technology that is out there, and be a partner with many small and medium-sized companies.
Well, amen to that. I mean, I know that there are a lot of companies out there today, and a lot of innovators, a lot of investors who would agree with you on everything you said, and a lot of folks in the government as well. So look, thank you so much for being here with us. That's a wrap for our episode and for our Summer of AI series. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into all things AI. And thanks so much to Ms. Hay for being here with us today. Thanks also to Tatum Clifton, Aiden Pasco, Claude Jennings, and the entire NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode and the entire summer series. Fault Lines is now on YouTube, so be sure to check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and share with your friends and family. And tune in next week, September 18th, as we return to our regular Fault Lines programming, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you up to speed fast 3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You'll get to hear me, Jessica Jones, Les Munson, and Morgan Vina discuss the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. Thanks all. Have a great rest of the week, and see you next week, Monday, September 18th, bright and early.